Okay, so one of the features of the Seder is the teaching of Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel famously said, anyone who does not say these three things, night of the Seder, has not fulfilled his obligation. You have to say Pesach, Matzah, and Mar. He explains what. The Pesach means to jump over, and the Paschal Lamb, the sacrifice of the Paschal Lamb, is commemoration of how Hashem passed over the houses of the Egyptians and saved the Jewish people. Marar is to commemorate how the Egyptians embittered our lives when we were in Egypt. And matzah is how, as we say in the Haggadah, matzah we eat this matzah because there was no time for the dough to rise until Hashem redeemed us. There's no time for the dough to rise before Hashem revealed himself to us and redeemed us. And that's why we eat the matzah. You have to have all three things. But there's a difference between the matzah and the mar that we eat nowadays, the matzah and the mar that we'll eat when Mashiach will come. Today, the mitzvah of eating matzah is a biblical mitzvah. The mitzvah of eating mar is only a rabbinical mitzvah, not a biblical mitzvah. Why not? So the Rambam writes the reason. He says because the mitzvah of Marar is associated with the Paschal Lamb. And since the mitzvah of Marar has to do with the Paschal Lamb, since we don't have the Paschal Lamb, since we don't have the Korban Pesach, therefore the mitzvah of Marar today is only a rabbinic mitzvah, not a biblical mitzvah. That's what the Rambam says. But that's all needs to be understood. Why would the matzah and the Marar be connected to each other? Matzah is all about the redemption, the freedom from Egypt. Matzah emphasizes the freedom. Matzah emphasizes how we were emancipated and liberated by Hashem. That's what Matzah is about, the redemption. Marar is about slavery. So why is it that you need to have the mitzvah of Matzah linked to the mitzvah of Marar? So that if you can't, the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach, rather, mitzvah of the Paschal Lamb. Mitzvah of the Paschal Lamb is how Hashem redeemed us and skipped over the house of the Egyptians. Why is the mitzvah of Marar linked to the mitzvah of the Paschal Lamb? Why, if you don't have the Paschal Lamb, you also don't have the mitzvah of eating Marar? The mitzvah of Marar and the mitzvah of the Paschal Lamb are opposite mitzvahs. One is about commemoration of the exile, one's commemoration of the redemption. Why are they linked to each other? This is a question that has been asked by many of the commentaries on the Rambam. And so let's approach it this way. The Rebbe gives a fascinating answer. There are two parts to the mitzvah of the commemoration of the redemption. There's a speech part, saying the story of the Haggadah, and there's an action part, eating the matzah, the mar, and the Paschal Lamb. So we find this element in the mitzvah of recounting the redemption. Torah says that you recount the redemption right first, focusing on the exile. Torah says, first talk about how terrible the exile is, and then talk about the redemption. Don't go straight to talk about the redemption. Begin with begin with how we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. And the reason we do this is understood because in order to highlight the impact of the redemption, you see the impact of the redemption in the prism of how things were like, then you understand the magnitude of the redemption. So it makes sense that we begin with the exile to be able to appreciate the redemption. That makes sense. However, what about the action components of the Seder? Do we find a similar thing? The answer is yes. In the action part, we also have Marar first, which is this idea of commemorating the exile. And then there is the Paschal Lamb, which commemorates the redemption. So now we can understand why they depend on each other. Because the purpose of in the murder to feel the bitterness of the slavery, the purpose of that is to commemorate the redemption. You have to first feel the slavery. So in a time of the Beis Hamikdash, at that time it was more easily to feel the redemption, to feel the freedom. Why? Because Jewish people were then free. When we had a Beis Hamikdash, when we had a temple in Jerusalem, so it was a lot easier for everyone to experience the redemption. Hashem has redeemed us and we're saved. It's good to feel that. So at that time, eating the maror only highlighted the mitzvah of the Paschal Lamb. The mitzvah, you can understand how eating the maror is a mechshire mitzvah. Mechshire mitzvah means it's something which is done that enhances another mitzvah. We understand that eating the maror in the time of Beis Hamikdash, that was something that really highlighted the redemption. But nowadays, when we don't have yet a Beis Hamikdash, so eating the maror, we don't really have a full sense of freedom. So what's the purpose of the night of the Seder? It's not about feeling the exile. It's not about commemorating what happened in the past. As the Rambam says in mitzvah, is that we should feel free. That's the purpose. So talking about the exile on this and the difficulty in the exile isn't really a pedestal to place the redemption on, because the pedestal actually puts this somber tone on the Seder because we haven't yet left fully Egypt. We're still in exile. In the time of Beis Hamikdash, where there's a full redemption, well, actually it's not really a full redemption, but things are pretty good. So it makes sense that there's a biblical mitzvah to have the maror. Because in order to fully have the Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, the sacrifice to do its thing, you have to have also a sense of, to do an action, do something that gives you a sense of the bitterness in Egypt. I don't know exactly the details of the story, but I heard that when the Rebbe rescued these 1,000 Persian boys and girls, when Khomeini came to power, they made the Rebbe arrange a Passover Seder for them. I heard the Rebbe wanted them to have rice as their custom, and I also heard that the Rebbe wanted to taste from their maror. So I heard apparently everyone wanted to identify and empathize with the pain of the Jewish people in Iran, what they went through. So the bottom line is, saying the story about God is not supposed to be an external thing. It's supposed to be an experiential. That we are looking at ourselves and we're free. So in the time of Beis Hamikdash, highlighting the experience of the pain of the maror is a good thing. It makes a stark contrast to the redemption. However, nowadays, until Mashiach comes, eating the maror is not considered a biblical commandment. Why not? Because you can't really experience the full redemption now from Egypt, because we're not fully freed from the exile today, and therefore eating the maror and focusing on the exile isn't a biblical commandment, because that would just offset the sense of freedom and redemption in the night of the Seder. So this analysis to why the mitzvah of maror is only rabbinic nowadays will give us some insight also into the charoses. Why do we eat the charoses? Charoses looks like mortar, and it's a commemoration for the hardship of the Jewish people working in creating these bricks out of mortar for the Egyptian taskmasters. So the theme of the charoses is the exile. According to Maimonides, according to the Rambam, not only do we dip the maror into the charoses, we dip the matzah into the charoses. And the Sefer HaMaimonides asks the question, what are you doing, man? Why does Maimonides want to dip the matzah in the charoses? We do this nowadays, we have a big problem, everyone's so frum. They don't want the matzah to touch any moisture, especially the brachas. but the Manig was coming to this from a different angle. The Manig is saying, matzah is about redemption, right? We eat the matzah to commemorate how Hashem redeemed us so quickly. The charoses is what? It's about the mortar. Why in the world would you dip the matzah in the charoses? So according to what we said, now we understand. The purpose of dipping the matzah in the charoses is to highlight the greatness of the redemption. We're together with eating the matzah, which is about redemption. We highlight the contrast of the mortar. Look at this. We just had mortar. We were people who lived with like slaves working hard to create these bricks, and now look at the matzah. So the charoses add, so to speak, taste to the matzah. It makes you feel the impact of what the matzah is about. That's what the Sefer HaManig. That's what the Bach answers. The Bach doesn't say it exactly so clearly, but that's how the Rebbe interprets the Bach. That that eating the matzah at the same time as a charoses makes sense because charoses is about slavery, and in the matzah, when you have charoses, is when do you feel free? When you know what you've been through. Like we always learn about in Chassidus, Yisrael and Achishach, you appreciate the light after having been through the darkness. Now the Ravid, he analyzes every word of the Maimonides, and he has some choice words to use whenever he disagrees with Maimonides. Some say that the Ravid specifically used very sharp words because he respected Maimonides. He knew that Maimonides was a Moses of the generation. If anyone to consider anyone else's words, they would have to really state their opinion very strongly and very insolently. I mean, think about it. In the time of the Rambam, you know how people said Kaddish time of the Rambam of Rambam? Yeah. When the time of the Rambam, they would say Kaddish like this. Now we say Mashiach should come in our lifetime immediately. We say Kaddish. Mashiach should come in our lifetime, in the lifetime of all the Jewish people. In time of the Rambam, people would say, and Mashiach should come in the time of the Rambam. That's how every time they said Kaddish, they mentioned the Rambam. So in order for the Ravid to make a point, he had to specifically be a little forceful. So the Ravid comments on the Rambam, and he says, Zeh Hevel. This is vanity. This is ridiculous. This is air. These are words of air. Now, it's interesting. The Rogatchover Goen, the Rogatchover says that the Ravid waited to criticize the Rambam. He didn't criticize the Rambam when he said that we dip matzah into charoses in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. He only criticized the Rambam when he said to dip the matzah into the charoses in the time of the exile. So according to what we said before, we can understand this. Why? In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the Ravid would agree that we do dip the matzah in the charoses. Why? Because at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, you could feel the impact of the redemption in the light of the exile, in the contrast to the exile, because you're experiencing the redemption right now. So therefore, when you want to experience the redemption from Egypt, you could talk about how terrible the slavery is. So therefore, the Rav would agree, yes, dip the matzah in the charesis then. However, in the time of the exile, when things are so difficult, then the Rav would say, no, you cannot have the matzah dipping in the charesis now, because since we have a full experience of exile in the present, we're not yet out of exile. So highlighting the mortar actually would take away from the taste of the matzah. How it would taste the meaning of the matzah. So therefore, the Rav says zehevel. He says this is worthless. In other words, he's saying it's going to weaken the whole sense of redemption. You're trying to experience redemption tonight. Zehevel, the Rav is saying that this is empty. He's saying what the Rav means is not that the Maimonides' words are ridiculous. What he wants to say is zehevel. It's going to ruin the whole thing you're trying to do. It's going to taint the sense of redemption with this tint of slavery. It's going to take away from it. And therefore, the Ravid says that we should not dip the matzah in the charesis. Now, yes, time Beis Hamikdash was okay, but you cannot dip the matzah in the charesis today. So, God willing, tomorrow we will go more deeply into this. But just to recap what we learned again. So, just like we said before about the matzah, that when is it possible to commemorate? I'm sorry, let's say before about the murder. That when is it a biblical commandment to commemorate the slavery? It's only when you're able to fully feel the freedom, because there's freedom happening now in time of Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, there's no biblical obligation to remember the slavery today, because it could take away from the sense of freedom of Pesach. Therefore, it's not a biblical obligation. Same as also regards to Charoses commemoration to slavery. And so, in the time of Beis Hamikdash, both the Rambam and the Ravid agree we should dip the matzah in the Charoses in order to emphasize the commemoration of the freedom in the matzah. It highlights what the matzah is doing. But nowadays, the Ravid disagrees, and the Ravid says, do not dip the matzah in the Charoses, because this commemoration of the slavery will actually disturb this the sense of freedom. I just want to mention one more tangential point. Why do we eat matzah and mar together? I better observe about to ask them. Why do we eat matzah and mar together? If eating matzah chareses is an issue, why do we eat matzah and mar? No one has any problem with that. Why is it right? Why doesn't the Ravid say don't eat matzah and mar? So the answer is the purpose of eating matzah and mar is not the same as eating matzah and chareses. The purpose of eating matzah and chareses is to highlight the redemption in the background of the slavery. So therefore, they could have a question whether that's relevant in the time when you're still experiencing slavery. But the purpose of eating matzah and mar is something else. The time Beis Hamikdash, they matzah and mar and the Korban Pesach together. And therefore, Hillel said we should do something to commemorate not the Exodus. If it was about commemoration of the Exodus, about experiencing redemption, then you'd be right. Then would it make sense to eat the matzah and the mar nowadays as much? Because we don't feel you're going to ruin the taste of the matzah with the message of the matzah with the message of the slavery. But since the purpose of eating the matzah and mar together is to commemorate not the redemption, but to commemorate what happened in Beis Hamikdash, therefore there is a thing of eating the matzah and the mar together. So the Ravid says nowadays don't eat matzah chareses. It's going to ruin the message of the matzah. We still have to explain the Rambam. Why did the Rambam disagree? And how come the Rambam says that even today you should dip the matzah in the chareses? How would the Rambam respond to the Ravid that eating the matzah and the chareses? Why wouldn't that take away from the sense of freedom? So to explain this, we have to explain more deeply the difference between the commemoration to the slavery that's given to us by the mother, the commemoration of the slavery that we have by the charoses. The murder, the bitter taste of the murder, how that brings us to commemorate the slavery. How is that different, the commemoration of slavery that the mortar gives us? So tomorrow, we'll figure the difference between those two things. That will give us some insight on why the Rambam holds that nowadays there is a mitzvah to dip the matzah in chareses, and the Ravid disagrees. Which Hashem gets that tomorrow. Any questions, comments, criticism?